Do you have a closed caption enabled on yours since you're the one that's recording?
Good point. You do not. Give me 1 second. Oh, lost it. Okay.
Great. Be interested to see how it compares to the other live transcript we did.
got 17 people in the waiting room. Do you want me to admit our clocks run 2-minute fast on our computer, so I can wait too. if you'd
I think
rather.
it's okay to go ahead and let people in now.
Okay.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. If you are just signing in, welcome. We're going to be getting started in a few minutes, just letting a few people come in. We are going to be taking questions at the end. So for now, if you could stay muted, that would be really helpful for everyone's audio sake. And we're just going to wait one more minute. I can see a few more people coming in now from the waiting room. And I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes as people trickle in here. And just those that have just logged in, we are going to be taking questions at the end. And for the sake of everyone's audio quality, if you could, for now, make sure that you're all muted for now. Thank you. So I have 3 after on my clock, so I think it's good to go ahead and get started, and hopefully some more folks will trickle in. And so thank you for joining us today. Welcome. Today we're going to be doing the Staffing the Humanities grant webinar. And again, just if you're trickling in now, if you could remain muted for everyone's audio sake, that would be really greatly appreciated. We will be opening up for questions after presentation. So just be great. Keep track of your questions. You can enter questions in the chat, and we'll do a round of question answer at near the end of the presentation. So thank you, and we'll get started. So today, who we have speaking is myself. I'm a program officer with Mass Humanities. Also with us today is Catherine Stevens, our director of grants, my colleague, who will be helping us out, monitoring the chat and making sure that we're on track today. Just you all should have received a notice when you logged in. We are recording today, so just be aware of that. And the recording after this will be made available for everyone as well. So those of you that are new to Mass Humanities is a state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities since 1974. We create opportunities for people of Massachusetts to improve their lives and build a more equitable Commonwealth through the humanities. Mass Humanities receives major support from the National Endowment of Humanities and Mass Cultural Council, as well as generous private donors. As a private 501c3 nonprofit organization, Mass Humanities is committed to responsible stewardship of public and private resources through the guidance of our statewide board of directors and staff. Today, we're going to be talking about the Staffing the Humanities grant. If you had attended our previous grant webinar last week, it covered all of the grants that we're going to be doing this year. We do have a recording of that webinar if you've missed it. But so today you are probably going to hear some repeated information from that webinar, but additionally, we'll go a little bit more in depth into this specific grant line. So this new grant line, the Staffing the Humanities grant, was created in response to needs identified through Mass Humanities pandemic relief programs, previously known as CARES and SHARP, as well as a 2021 survey we did with recent applicants and grantees. What we found was that 45% of SHARP grantees specifically requested funds for staffing. Additionally, 54% of our respondents selected Staffing the Humanities as their top choice for a grant program. And as you can see on the slide here, a quote from one of those survey responses: "By far our largest expense is salaries and wages. Everything we do is people, intellectual talent, and hard work behind it. And we at Mass Humanities want to make sure that you can continue the hard work and yet you're staffed appropriately to do so." So this Staffing the Humanities grant is going to support the growth and development of humanities programs across the Commonwealth by providing staffing funds to help organizations increase their staff capacity and retention. A very big picture overview of the grant. The amount that you can request will be between $7,000 up to $20,000. The application is available now online, and the application deadline is April 4th. After that, the decisions will be announced in June of this year. And just be aware when you're getting ready to complete the application that you'll be expected to complete an Excel budget sheet. You'll need to provide your organization's 990 or your most recent operating year's expenses, job descriptions, or resumes of staff that you are looking to hire or expand. One big important note that's different from our other grant lines is that there is no matching. So previous grant lines, you may have seen that there's a cost or a cash share match required. There is no requirement for this grant, but it is recommended. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get to the budget section for this grant. Additionally, one important eligibility note to be aware of is that only past Mass Humanities grantees are eligible for this. We're looking to support small humanities-focused nonprofit organizations that are planning humanities programs in 2022. So again, applicants will request amounts will be between $7,000 up to $20,000. These will be for staffing costs incurred between June 1st of 2022 and June 1st of 2023. And we are looking to make an opportunity for successful applicants to be able to renew these grant funds for a second year. Talked a little bit about timing already, but again, the deadline application is open and the deadline to submit your application is April 4th. The grants will be announced June, and then grant funds for successful awardees will need to be spent by June 15th of 2023. And then we will have a final report due as of September of 2023. Going back to eligibility, applicants must be 501c3 or fiscally sponsored museums, historical societies, or cultural organizations with humanities programs, or state and federally recognized tribes. Also, you would have to have an operation budget between $50,000 and $350,000. We're looking to see that your operation budget was within this range as of December 31st of 2021. If you're not on a calendar year, we just want to see what your past year's operational budget was. For example, what you would submit on your 990 as your expenses for the previous year. Additionally, you need to have 5 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. To calculate what your FTEs or your full-time equivalent employee count is, you take the total number of hours, paid hours worked weekly by staff and divide it by 40. We're using 40 hours as full-time for this particular application. So for example, if you have a director who works 40 hours a week and a part-time program manager who works 25 hours a week, then your FTE would be 1.625. So we're looking to see that you had less than five or fewer FTEs as of December 31st, 2021. If you're not sure if you are a past grantee of Mass Humanities, you can check our website, which if you go to masshumanities.org/grants/past grants, you can find there's a search function. This is a snapshot of that web page, but just below this image, there's a search function where you can search for your organization. You do, however, have to click specifically on SHARP or CARES to check the relief money grants. So just keep that in mind. If you're not sure, you can also contact us directly if you need to for that as well. Continuing, additionally, applicants need to have completed their Mass Humanities, any open grants they have, and submit their final report for those grants prior to completing an application. There are a few exceptions to this, so you can apply for a Reading Frederick Douglass Together grant for 2022 or a Bridge Street sponsorship grant for 2022. You can also have an open SHARP grant and apply for this. And fiscal sponsors can have more than one Mass Humanities grant at one time. The big thing to note is that you can't apply for the Staffing the Humanities grant and the Expand the Massachusetts Stories grant. So just keeping that in mind when you're thinking about which to apply to. Also, if you are a Expand Massachusetts Stories grantee from 2021, you're not eligible for this. So also keep that in mind. And finally, applicants need to make sure that they have humanities programs or a mission that aligns with humanities programs specifically. A little bit more about fiscally sponsored applicants. So if you're not a 501c3, if you're an ad hoc group or a nonprofit without the 501c3 status, you'll need to find an eligible 501c3 organization to be your fiscal sponsor. Fiscal sponsors will manage the grant funds and need to be identified in the application as such. So if you are going to be fiscally sponsored, just keep in mind that fiscal sponsors receive and manage the grant funds. So the checks direct deposits will go directly into the account for the sponsor, and that you'll need to provide the correct tax ID and contact information for that fiscal sponsor in the application form. In addition to those two things, you also need to provide a fiscal sponsor agreement. The application does link to sample fiscal sponsor agreements, but you're welcome to use your own. So a little bit more nitty gritty about the specifics of this grant is talking about what will they fund. So this grant is looking to fund new staff that you're expanding your hours of either current staff or bringing back staff in order to expand your current existing humanities programs in order to do more programs or reach more people or different people than previously, or creating new humanities programs that addresses a need within the organization, or restoring previously existing humanities programming that has been lost due to the pandemic. So really, we want to see a difference from what you've been doing and what you're applying for the use of these funds. It's not sustaining so much as growing or changing. What do we mean by humanities staff? So full-time, salaried, temporary, seasonal, part-time, or contract employees are all eligible with the exception of consultants. And we're defining consultants as those who are paid for advice only. You can apply for a percentage of a staff position's time if a staff position has multiple responsibilities that are not necessarily humanities programming based. So for example, if a position spends 20% of their time on humanities program and 80% on administration, then we would only be able to fund that 20% of that salaried position's time. So we'll get a little bit more into how you show that in the budget in a minute. You can also apply for funding to support more than one position if multiple positions are supporting humanities programming. So the following are not eligible for this grant. So if you have staff time or positions that do administrative work or anything that's not humanities based, and that includes fundraising or advocacy efforts as well, or sustaining currently existing programs without a plan for how you're going to grow those programs or grow the staff time. So you'll have to be able to do that, express that in the narrative. So work also that's ineligible is anything that's outside of that grant period I mentioned before, between June 1st of 2022 and June 1st of 2023. Additionally, friends of groups and government entities are not eligible for this grant line. In terms of the programming eligibility, this list comes from the application directly, but these are some possible eligible programs that would fall into that category. So cultural oral history storytelling, historical cultural exhibitions, presentations, discussions, historical or cultural tours, programs that educate about culture and traditions, community conversations about values, identity, big questions about the world we live in, education or conversations about books, theater, art, media, or history, education or conversation about community issues and government, education about democracy, ethics, or philosophy, writing workshops that focus on humanities topics like history, identity, or culture, or other programs that feature humanities at its core. Within the guidelines, you also can find our definition. Sorry, folks, I just want to, if you can keep your audio muted as we proceed so that everyone has a good sound quality, and we'll open up for questions at the end. So going back to this, so you may have other humanities programs. I do recommend you take a look at the humanities definition within the guidelines. If you're not sure, you can also directly reach out to myself or Catherine. A little bit more about ineligible programs. Art or handiwork classes, STEM classes, exercise or sports classes, financial management classes, leadership classes, programs about helping academic success or getting into college, tutoring or homework help programs, media literacy classes, mostly on technical skills, direct social services, the creation of professional art or artistic performances, professional theater productions, and post-performance discussions. We're looking to see a very robust humanities-focused programming that doesn't fall into these categories, but may fall into the previous categories mentioned. Additionally to humanities programming, this grant is also prioritizing programs that primarily serve historically excluded communities. This list comes from the application, a list of possible historically excluded communities that your organization may prioritize. When we say primarily serve, we mean that you serve it chiefly or mainly. You serve this community before others. However, we do recognize that many communities identify across these categories or don't fit neatly into them. So we are asking that you can check up to 4 of these categories. This isn't a requirement of the grant, but it is going to be one of the weighted review criteria. So keep that in mind. Speaking of the review criteria, these are the 5 review criteria that the applications are going to be reviewed on. So humanities content or methods is central to your mission and to this program. So a program demonstrates sound approaches to humanities content or methods and allows for diverse perspectives among participants or audiences. Next is need for additional staffing. So you demonstrate that there's a need in order to achieve your organizational goals. And the program addresses, like needs the additional staffing to reach those goals. Also identified. Priority communities, that is as much as your program has a meaningful impact on historically excluded communities as mentioned previously, and having a program plan that demonstrates a plan for using the grant funds in order to restore, develop a strong humanities program. the program also should align with your organizational goals and missions and be realistic and achievable. Finally, you'll be evaluated or reviewed on the budget. So staffing costs that are reasonable, justified. The budget is realistic, aligns with the needs and the proposed activities and the organization's priorities, and includes a competitive wage rate. So this chart you'll also find in the application. This comes from the New England Museum Association Salary and Benefits Survey and gives a pretty wide range for a medium full-time annual salary for small organizations, as well as a medium part-time hourly wage for different possible positions you may be looking for. This doesn't mean that your position has to be within this wage category, but it is something that the reviewers are going to be making note of in your application, so just be aware of it. Finally, required documents that you should know that you will be needed to complete this application. You'll need to upload operational expense. So this should be your first 2 pages of your most recently reported 990. And if you don't have a 990, it would be your total expenses for your most completed fiscal year. Also, you'll need a job description. So a document with a description of the job that you're looking to propose to expand or hire. And if you are a fiscally sponsored organization, you'll need to provide a fiscal sponsor agreement. Again, the application links to a sample one that you can use, but you're welcome to use your own. But just keep in mind that it should describe the responsibilities of the different parties, what the project work done is by the applicant, what the financial management and accountability for the tax exempt entity will be. Additionally, you have the option to upload a resume. For example, if you have a current part-time person that you're looking to expand hours, you can upload that person's resume. Just keep in mind, you're limited to 1 upload for this. So you'll need to combine your documents into a single PDF. The application does link to a website where you can do this. Also, keep in mind that the resume should include the person's relevant credentials, skills, publications, experiences, but we don't want to see 10-page resumes. So try to keep it to 2 pages where you can. Now I'll get a little bit more into the budget requirements. So this grant is going to cover specifically the staffing costs for your programming. So it could be a % of your salaried positions that support humanities programming, a full-time or part-time position that supports the programming, or a temporary, seasonal, or contract position that supports the programming. And a few definitions of what we consider a part-time position. That's someone that works fewer than 40 hours a week, or a contractor or independent contractor typically is known as a 1099 employee based on the tax form they have, someone who enters into a contractual agreement for a set service for an exchange of a fee. To complete the budget, there is a budget template in the application form that you'll be asked to complete. We'll go over that in a minute as well. And the big thing to keep in mind is that you'll need to have the request amount in the budget form match what you enter into the application form. Otherwise, we'll just take the amount that's listed in the budget form and modify your application to match that. This is what the budget is going to look like when you download it, and it is different than previous budget forms that Mass Humanities has used. We are using Massachusetts Philanthropy's common application form, so hopefully with the intent of making things hopefully easier. You may have seen this used in other grants. And I know it's different, so we'll go over some of those differences. One thing that I do want to let people know is that where you see the gray columns is actually an actuals column. So it's not needed for you to complete this at the time of completing your application. This is for your own purposes, for if you get funded to track the actuals costs that you'll need to report in the final report later on. So for right now, you can ignore those gray columns in the actuals columns and focus on what is in the yellow columns here, which we would be completing. You also see that the request amount is also the very first item that you'd be entering into the income sources here. And Another difference you'll see is that the in-kind is an additional line item in the income sources. So make sure you don't miss the in-kind as well. And by in-kind support, I mean it's like a cashless donation. So if it includes for use of facilities, supplies donated to the project, volunteer time, that's what we would consider an in-kind income here. Below the income on the budget form, we get to the expenses, and we've separated out the staffing expenses from other program expenses because this grant will only be covering eligible staffing costs. And as an example, you can see how we would want it to be listed in terms of the title and the percent of time that you're looking, and then the expense. You can also list other program expenses here. Just keep in mind those won't be eligible for the grant. So if you have program expenses such as supplies and marketing, you'll need to enter in a corresponding income above it. Also, there's a new footnotes box below. So if you need to provide more detail about a certain income or expense, you can do so there. A few questions that I want to point out in the narrative portion of the application. The program description has these two bolded questions here are also included in the question prompt. So I just want to recommend that applicants try to address those questions in their response to the narrative. So when asked about program description, focus on how the humanities subjects or methods are important to the program or participants' experiences. And you can try to frame the relationship of the humanities with our guidelines definition. For example, do they focus on history or culture? How do they focus? Do they engage in questions and issues about the community present? You can also list the programs as well following that, but I do recommend trying to respond to that bolded question in that narrative, as well as how is the program different than your current or existing? So what you did last year and what you want to do with this grant fund. So are you adding more programs? Are you trying to reach more people? Are you trying to reach a different audience? And that's what that question is trying to get at. Another narrative question I want to flag is the program goals. And additionally, these bolded questions are within the question prompt. I just don't want you to miss them. So when you respond to the goals question, so what is the end result that you're hoping to propose with increased staff? Are you trying to make the community or a certain group more aware of their history or culture? Are you trying to get the community to feel more connected or welcome or represented? This is just an example. It's just what is the intent that you're trying to achieve by increasing the staff? What will that enable you to do? And then how are you going to measure whether or not you've met that goal? So are you going to do audience surveys, and what types of questions will be in that survey? How will that survey be distributed? And then if you're trying to reach certain benchmarks, like 50% more people or a certain number of certain more people, then it's important to include that detail in that answer as well. And before I open it up to questions from everyone, I just want to kind of go through some questions that I've been receiving about this new grant line. And hopefully that might help address some of your questions that you have burning in your hearts right now. So can the grant fund more than one staff person? Yes, you can apply for multiple staff positions. Can the grant fund consulting costs or fees? And no, this grant is not eligible for consultant fees. And again, we're defining that as someone that's paid for advice only. And so other services provided by temporary or contract employees are eligible, not just plain advice. Can grant fund contract employees? Yes, temporary seasonal contract employees are eligible. Can you tell us if the organization is eligible to apply for these if they have no full-time employees right now? Yes, we do consider 0 as being less than 5. However, do keep in mind that your operational budget needs to be at least 50,000 as of December of 2021 to be eligible. If you have fewer than 5 FTEs, but your operation budget is larger than 350,000, are you ineligible? Unfortunately, yes. Organizations need to have both less than five or fewer, full-time employees and an operational budget between 50,000 and 350,000. If you have a SHARP grant, are you eligible? Yes, you can have an open SHARP grant. The important thing to note about grants that are open is specifically the Expand Massachusetts Stories grant. So if you have a 2021 Stories grant, you're not eligible, and you can't apply to both staffing and the Stories grant. So keep that in mind. Can this fund interns or federal work study positions? This question came up in our webinar last week. And yes, just keep in mind that the criteria around the competitive wages for positions is still going to apply. And in your narrative, you're going to need to make a strong case for that an intern is the best fit for your programs and your organization's needs. Can this fund 2021 full-time positions? No. So really we want to see that it's expanding. So this isn't sustained. It can be someone who previously was an employee in 2021 who's adding hours, but not at the same level. So if you have an employee that worked 20 hours last week and you want to fund them for 20 hours this week, that would not necessarily be eligible. We're looking for growing your staff, not sustaining. And finally, the website has the full guidelines and the link to the online application. If you have other questions outside that we're not able to address in this webinar today, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is here and will be in the chat as well. And so I'm just going to open it up now for questions. And I think if you can, try to put your questions in the chat, and hopefully Catherine has kept track of some of them and might be able to flag some for me early on so I can try to address them. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people. Oops.
So the chat's been pretty quiet, so you're welcome to put in questions now. I do have one. The first question is, what would a competitive wage for interns be? Do you have a range in mind?
Yeah, so we actually didn't list interns in the chart, and I don't believe it was part of that study. So I would look at just what the lowest range is on those positions and try to do something that's close to that.
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, Jen, we are still looking for any of these positions to be a competitive wage position. So looking at what's feasible for you and seems within range. You're welcome also to raise your hands in, I think we have enough folks that I could see it if you raised your hands, and we could also have you unmute if you wanted to and ask a question.
Looks like Andrew has his hand raised. Andrew, do you?
Hi, Catherine. Glad to see you. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
I'm happy that I'm looking at attending this grant. I just wanted to find out, since we're growing, we're planning to put a full-time staff for the foundation. Would that so you said that would apply for newly staff?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, full-time salaried position is eligible for this, the cost of that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for attending. Looks like Faith has a question. Do you want to mute yourself, Faith?
Hello, I have a quick question about which month is considered when thinking about hours and determining full-time employees. For example, the museum, the Hammy Castle Museum, which is where we're based and we're from, has very different winter hours than we have for summer hours. So I was just wondering what month should be considered.
It's a good question. I think you'd want to consider what I want to say, like what your most seasonal peak would be in order to be eligible, but we can talk more about that if you want to email me directly. It might be worth a bigger conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I have a question from the chat. If we're we can shift to the chat. I have a question from John. It says, we have not lost staff. We have continued with our core group, but are facing a large deficit. Can we consider restoring staffing as a way to rebuild our budget and achieve a sustainable position? I'm having a little hard time understanding the difference between understanding what restoring staff means in this question. John, if you want to maybe elaborate, or Jen, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I would say that we're looking to see if you are restoring staff, that you're restoring your programming as well, so that you are bringing back maybe a program that was lost due to the pandemic. So just keep that in mind. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, so here I am. Thank you for the answer. I guess compared to last year and this year, without PPP and some other funding, the organization is facing, a challenge with that funding gone. We're committed to continuing with the people who provide our programming, but we have a deficit. So I think our choice could have been to reduce our operations, and in that way it would be clear that we're restoring our program staff. But since we haven't, lost people, but we're facing a deficit, I guess my question is, can I look at the term that you use, restoring staff, as a way to rebuild what was a viable operating budget? Does that make sense? So these are all program people. We all do this work, and we've lost a lot of our financial capacity, and this grant could help us establish it again, so we will be vibrant and more balanced.
I think that again might be worth like a bigger conversation.
Okay.
So it might be worth like emailing us, but I
will do
do
that.
I do want to say that this isn't a pandemic relief grant.
Right.
We're hoping that maybe some other funds will be made available that will address your exact need that you're talking about. This is like funding that we've freed up from others, like sources that we knew that there is a need for organizations to have operational support grants. So long story short, to answer your question, I'm not sure if that's really going to be an eligible piece to just be something that's sustained funding. And we do understand that a lot of organizations are still facing large deficits, and that the relief money didn't really fully support organizations as much as they would want. But with this particular grant line, we are looking to see a growth of your programming in some way. So that may be maybe looking at taking the % of time that your staff had been working on like administrative, just keeping the organization going, and maybe directing more of it to programming in order to achieve program growth from last year. So again, I think that might be worth just discussing a little bit more closely with me after this webinar.
I will follow up, but
Yeah.
what makes it a challenge is to think that with our current structure, if we're deficit, and we are expected to add on, the challenge of being able to articulate a sustainable position towards the end is the challenge.
Yeah, this might not be the right grant for that. You might want to
Okay.
look at maybe
Okay.
like if your programming fits the stories grant, or some of the smaller kind of easy to apply to grants.
Okay.
Something like
Thank
that.
you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bridge Street.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank
check
you.
out Bridge Street.
Okay.
Sorry, I saw that a few others maybe have questions. Did you see anything else in the chat, Catherine?
Sure. Let's see, I have one question. Oh, I lost it. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
So if we hire an independent contractor to train our teachers in the past, can we request the funding to hire her again this year?
Yes, but I think you would need to show growth. So if it's different than what you did previously. So you can maybe hire the same person to do different programs, more programs. But if you're just doing the same thing that you've always done, then it would probably not be eligible for this particular opportunity. You
I
can't
have
hire
another-
the same people. Sorry, you can't hire the same people that you had before, but we were looking to see an expansion or a growth as well. Go ahead, Catherine. Sorry.
Sure. The question is, we're hoping to support a part-time archivist position to help us catalog our growing collection. Would that type of position be eligible? Does the program outcome need to be more public-facing, related to public programs?
So there does need to be a public benefit component to it, but an archivist can be supportive of a program that would have a public reaching. So I just recommend thinking about what the public benefit could be. If there's if the archivist is working on creating resources that will be free and accessible to the public via a website or through educational programs, you'll just want to make sure that that's clear in the narrative.
I want to make sure that anyone who has a hand up has had a chance to ask a question. So maybe you can shift from the chat back to raised hands. I see Andrew. I don't know if we've already answered your question or great.
Sorry, actually, I'm a different Andrew.
I am a Catherine, so I understand.
Oddly enough, the other Andrew on this call has the same initials as I do. So my question is, when you were going over the grant and who gets funding and who doesn't, you mentioned something about administrative work. And I'm just, I'm curious as to what the definition of administrative work is, and if you could provide examples of administrative positions that do not receive, that will not receive funding from this.
Yeah, so it could be someone that does like some humanities programming. So we're really looking at programming staff specifically. I guess that's kind of what we were getting at. So if they do like any fundraising work, if they're doing like HR work, if they're doing something that's not necessarily like program based, I guess, I don't know if that helps answer that question.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Like,
okay,
a grant writer would not receive something, but like someone who teaches the program would receive.
Yes, that's a great example. Yeah.
Okay.
If
All right,
you
thank
do
you.
have like other specific questions, like if you're just not sure, feel free to reach out as well, because I know that, you know, for smaller organizations, especially, like people are doing a lot of things that may or may not necessarily feel like they're direct program support.
All right, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jen.
Yeah.
Another question from the chat that I think is similar to the one you just answered about collections work. This says, are accessioning and recording artifacts for use in exhibitions, publications, social media included in programming definition?
Yes, so archiving, recording, and activities that support the creation of programming are eligible.
I see a question. An element of an upcoming program of ours includes a theatrical performance. The play is free. Can the hired person work on this event?
So actually, artistic performances are one of the things that are not eligible as an eligible program. So if you have a humanities component to your programming, that's in addition to just the performance or goes beyond a post-show discussion, there may be some wiggle room there, but just keep in mind that specifically theatrical performances are not an eligible program for this grant.
Another question from the chat. Would a contractor who provides design services to our organization be eligible for funding if we intend to expand the services this year and those services also support humanities programming?
I would say that a reviewer is likely going to think that that is not a humanities program supportive position. I do recognize that, you know, designers do contribute to outreach for programming, but I think because that's so broad that it would be hard to make that case for it being a program supportive position.
Another question, can we request the funding for more than one person? I think we
Yes.
talked about this. Yeah.
You can, yes.
We've had a couple of questions about what a second year would look like and if there's a need to demonstrate that the position can continue for more than 1 year.
It's not a requirement that the position that you're looking to expand or hire is going to last more than 1 year. We just recognize that when you're hiring staff, it's likely that you're thinking beyond just a single year. So we do want to let people know that there will be an opportunity for current grantees to apply to renew the funds, so that they're not thinking of just contract employees that are eligible for this, but someone that you may sustain over time. But yes, contract and temporary and seasonal are also eligible for the grant as well.
Those are most of the questions I've seen in the chat, but if I've missed yours and you want to put it back in or direct me to it, please feel free to. And again, also please feel free to raise your hands. The question is, a one-time stipend eligible?
Yes, I think, again, you'll have to take into consideration that the reviewers are going to be looking at the competitive wage rates. So stipends may fall into a category where the reviewers may see that as not being a position that's going to retain or be attractive if it's like a lower end of a stipend. Just keep it in mind that it's one of the review criteria is going to be that competitive wage rate for this grant. But it will be, you can apply for like a contract stipend for this. I'm going to put my email in the chat one more time. If people have really specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I'm glad for everyone who's able to attend and hopefully get their questions answered and hopefully are excited about this new opportunity. We're excited at Mass Humanities that be able to do operational support grant. It will be a competitive grant and it is our first year doing this, but we are very excited about having this opportunity for hopefully addressing a need that exists. Thank you for the nice comments.
I think we could, we'll wait, we'll pause for another minute. But I also know everyone is busy and maybe hoping to get lunch. So if no new questions come through, and I know there's always a question in the last 20 seconds. If we don't see another question come through, then we'll close out in a minute.
And again, if you think of something afterwards, feel free to reach out. Okay, Catherine, I think
that was a minute. Thank you so much, Jen. Thank you everybody for your questions. And we look forward to being in touch.
Yeah. Have a good day. Enjoy your lunch.